The people who are currently at encampments in support of Hamas, which is what it is, I've seen those things. I've heard what they say. They're for Hamas. Even I, with my often jaded glance at the disintegration of thought in the West, was slightly surprised at the speed with which adults on American campuses were able to rush straight into the arms of Hamas. But fine, there they are. I would put out this question. I suspect you'd agree with me, Peter, that the women in particular protesting there on these campuses, probably a few years ago, were holding up signs that said, "Believe all women." Do you remember Believe All Women?
I remember that.
Wow, Believe All Women turns out to have a border. It turns out to have a cordon around it. It turns out to have an exception. It has a subclause. The subclause is, except Jewish women. Some of those students, 10 years ago maybe, when was it, 2014, the Chibok schoolgirls were stolen from northern Nigeria, where I've also been. And Hollywood celebrities, students, Michelle Obama, bring back our girls. Hashtag bring back our girls. Tell me where the demonstration has been, anywhere in America, from the campuses to Hollywood. Bring back our Jewish children. There's a reason there is no such hashtag. There's a reason why there is no such campaign. Jews don't count. Not in the eyes of these perverted minds on American campuses. Now, they don't know that they're bigots. And they may not know that they're racists. But we've been here before, many times. A lot of people don't mean to be evil. They don't mean to support evil, but they support evil. And that's what the students at Columbia and endless numbers of other universities across America have been doing.
All right, so, but what I don't understand is, what is the intellectual transmission belt here? How do you go from the senior members of faculties on the great universities today are people who trained in the 60s. How do you go from anti-Vietnam War to pro-Hamas? What is the intellectual progression that gets you from there to there?
I mean, there's an intellectual explanation. There's just also an obvious moral one. The intellectual one is that a lot of these people think their job is to educate students into becoming radicals.
I see. All right.
Now, a lot of I would like clearing out of American academia to such an extent that the job market would be unavailable to them in future. A lot of these people have nothing to add. They've never had anything to add. They teach grievance studies. And I always hoped, like a lot of people of my inclination, that these people would discover, the graduates would discover, that there were no jobs for them after learning how to be bitter and stupid at the cost of about $60,000 a year. But the faculty encourage them with the idea that, first of all, their opinions matter, and secondly, that they're informed. I will say this as strongly as I can. These students are narcissists of the worst kind, because they're not just narcissists, but they're ignoramus narcissists. Who thinks that the Israeli war cabinet, after a massacre of its people, should alter its war policy because of a bunch of ignoramuses in Colombia who've never seen a war and never lost someone in a war? Why would any government alter its war plan and get its generals to stop its war to get its hostages back because of some students at Berkeley? It's preposterous. What do they think they're doing? Who do they think is listening to them? Why do they think they're important? Do they know how to clear house to house in Rafah? Do they have any idea how to get the remaining hostages back without any civilian casualties? Are they able to clear large areas of ground with a tunnel network wider than the London Underground? Do they know how to find tunnel shafts? Do they know how to discern the difference between a tunnel shaft which is booby-trapped and one which is not? None of these things. They've thought of none of them. So that's the narcissism thing and the ignorance thing, but the evil thing is that instead of being some banal peacenik saying something like, why can't they just have peace?
Right.
It's like, brilliant insight, brilliant, no Israeli ever thought of that. Instead of that, they actually run all the way to supporting evil. But we've seen this before, Peter. We saw this in the 60s. We saw it in the 70s. There were previous generations of people in Germany, across Europe, and in America who had one idea of what not to be. Don't be a Nazi.
Yes.
Right. That was their one political philosophy after 1945. And it's not a bad place to start. Not a bad place to start. Don't be a Nazi. These people even now call themselves quite often anti-Nazis, anti-fascists. Well, in the 70s and the 60s, a lot of the people who orientated themselves that way, and that way alone, found themselves, for instance, supporting the PLO, the PLA, the PFLP, even when they were hijacking planes. And some of the people, very interesting book about this by Paul Berman, some of the people involved in that, whose one orientation had been, don't let's be Nazis, don't let's do what our parents did in Germany, ended up separating Jews from non-Jews on hijacked planes. So when these students today at American campuses who believe they're anti-fascist, they believe they're anti-racist, this is their one idea, and they behave as if it's an extraordinary idea and available only to them. When they decide that in order to be anti-Nazi and anti-oppressor and anti-white colonialist and much more, end up supporting or covering for or trying to ignore the rape and massacre of Jews, they're the Nazis.